Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely pumped you're joining me today because we are going to unpack a topic that is just massive in its evolutionary scale. But ironically, it begins with something almost all of us do every single day. We're going to trace the incredibly long, fascinating history of human biology, and we're going to ground it right in your mundane, everyday morning habit of making a cup of coffee. You know, think about it for a second. The spoon is tiny, barely a centimeter of curved metal. You dip it into a bag of white crystals, tip it into a cup, and honestly, you probably don't even think about it again. The sugar just dissolves before you've even finished stirring. Nothing about this simple, forgettable little gesture feels like history, right? It just feels like background noise on an ordinary morning. But here is the fascinating truth. As that sweetness hits your tongue, your receptors are lighting up and running a biological program that is actually older than the human species itself. It's an instinct older than the very continent you're sitting on. So when did we actually first start eating sugar? Okay, let's dive into this because to find the answer, we can't just look back a few centuries. We have to look tens of millions of years into the past. Section 1, the ancient primate sweet tooth, fossils from the Fam Depression. Picture this. If we transport ourselves back more than 30 million years ago, we're in northern Egypt. But it's not a desert. It's a thick, wet woodland canopy. And somewhere up in that canopy, an early primate ancestor, an ancestor to both modern monkeys and us, is facing a critical daily choice about what to eat. They basically had two main options. On one hand, hard, slow-release calories. We're talking nuts and seeds protected by tough shells that require really heavy, demanding labor to crack open. On the other hand, soft, fast-burning calories. Ripe fruit that yields easily and hands over its energy instantly. Now, picking the right fuel in a world without stored food or guaranteed meals wasn't just a dietary preference, it was literally a matter of life and death. So which path did they choose? Well, to find out, we have to look at the hardest tissue in the body. Teeth are essentially biological receipts that never lie. They chip when they meet resistance, and they decay when they're bathed in sugar. A group of brilliant researchers led by Ian Towell, alongside Matthew Borths and Carolina L., decided to read these ancient receipts. They analyzed 421 fossilized teeth from the Fam Depression, coming from 5 different genera of early anthropoids. They were specifically hunting for chips, which would prove a hard diet, and cavities, which would indicate a soft, sugary diet. So the crucial point is that out of all those teeth, only 5% showed any chipping at all. 5%! That is a strikingly low number compared to primates today that regularly crack nuts. Meanwhile, the cavity patterns pointed exactly to a profile you'd expect from animals eating soft, ripe, sugary fruit on a very regular basis. This leads us to a really fascinating takeaway. Soft, sugary fruit may have been the foundational diet, the default energy-efficient choice long before any hominin ever picked up a spear. Actually, this completely shatters the popular myth of our ancestors being purely tough, lean, meat-eating survivors, with sugar being some modern indulgence we just bolted on later. The reality is quite the reverse. The drive to seek out sweetness is carried by a gene called TS1R2, shaped over millions of years. It was our foundational survival instinct. If you could detect and crave sugar-dense food, you got fast energy. If you couldn't, you simply didn't survive. Section 2. Earning sugar through danger. The high cost of ancient honey. Fast forward millions of years later, our own hominin lineage split off, and the pressure to find fast energy changed shape. Our ancestors evolved to seek out an even more concentrated payload of fast-burning energy. The Cuevas de la Araña cave painting in eastern Spain, which is estimated to be between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, illustrates this perfectly. It depicts a human figure suspended way up high on a rope or vine ladder, reaching directly into a crevice filled with a wild bee nest. This is a person intentionally climbing towards severe danger. They're risking a deadly fall and enduring violent, repeated bee stings, just for a taste of pure sweetness. And that leads us to a profoundly important realization about our past. Sugar wasn't something you just had, it was something you earned, at real physical cost, maybe a handful of times a year. For most of human history, sugar was not a casual snack. It was a calculated risk. It was so incredibly scarce and energy-dense that extreme physical danger was considered a fair trade. That scarcity is the exact piece we are missing in our modern understanding of sugar. Section 3. From plant to crystal, the domestication of sweetness. Let's move to and see how this builds, because eventually humans made a momentous shift. We stopped climbing cliffs and searching for sugar, and we actually started growing it. Around 6 to 8,000 years ago in the highlands of New Guinea, a wild grass was domesticated into what we now know as sugarcane. But it's important to note, early cultivators weren't refining it. They literally just chewed the raw cane, sucked out the sweet juice, and spat out the fiber. The real astonishing leap happened later in India, somewhere between the 5th century BCE and the 4th century CE, when Indian ingenuity figured out how to boil the cane juice down and coax it into solid crystals. From there, sailors carried this new creation to southern China by 500 BCE, and by the 7th century CE, Chinese Tang emperor envoys were traveling specifically to India just to learn these incredible refining methods. The term for this invention in Sanskrit was Shakara, meaning grit or gravel. It's actually the ancient root of our modern word sugar. And this crystallization was a massive breakthrough, an absolute game changer. It turned a liquid that spoiled quickly into a solid, storable, tradable commodity. And as it spread toward Europe, it was treated as an exotic, incredibly expensive rarity. It was treated more like a spice or a medicine reserved for the sick and the wealthy, rather than a common everyday food. Section 4, the Industrial Sugar Explosion, Rethinking the Agricultural Rupture. Now, what's really interesting about this is the narrative around farming. As humans shifted to intensive farming, specifically grain-based diets, rates of dental cavities definitely did rise, because starchy grains break down into fermentable sugars in the mouth. This led to a widely repeated popular claim that the invention of farming single-handedly destroyed human teeth. The myth is that pristine, cavity-free hunter-gatherers suddenly gave way to completely tooth-decayed farmers. But a 2019 reanalysis found a 70% overlap in cavity rates between farming and hunter-gatherer populations. Climate and other factors played massive roles. So the agricultural shift, while real, was actually surprisingly modest in its overall impact on our oral health. To truly understand when our oral health fell off a cliff, we have to look at an incredibly elegant piece of research from 2013 by geneticist Christina Adler. Her team examined fossilized bacterial DNA from calcified dental plaque across 34 European skeletons, spanning 7,500 years of history. They mapped the ancient mouth bacteria and found something completely stunning. After an initial, pretty minor shift during the dawn of agriculture, the oral microbiome stayed incredibly stable for thousands of years, right up until about 400 years ago. So, what the heck happened 400 years ago? The data on British per capita sugar consumption, compiled by anthropologist Sidney Mintz, tells the whole story. In 1700, consumption was roughly 4 pounds a year. By 1800, it had surged to 18 pounds a year. The Industrial Revolution, coupled with vast Caribbean plantation systems that tragically utilized forced and enslaved labor, caused a catastrophic 400% supply shock in just 1 century. This completely rewired the global economy and flooded human biology with an unbelievable amount of sugar. Section 5, the evolutionary mismatch, biology versus abundance. And this brilliantly illustrates the core mismatch at the heart of our diets today. This incredibly recent industrial supply shock is the true rupture in our biological history. It wasn't the invention of farming, and it wasn't the ancient hominin tasting a piece of ripe fruit. It was the sudden, limitless supply that emerged barely 200 years ago. Our biology was built over tens of millions of years for extreme scarcity. Your taste for sweetness is an ancient survival edge. It is a hardware feature that kept your ancestors alive, not a modern moral failing or a weakness of character. But industrialization created an unlimited, cheap, year-round supply of the exact thing our bodies were desperately wired to seek out. The modern body was, and still is, completely unprepared for this level of abundance. Think of it like this. The software changed overnight, but the hardware is millions of years old. Which brings us right back to where we started. That tiny 1-centimeter metal spoon, effortlessly dissolving white crystals into your morning cup of coffee. It doesn't ask you to climb a vine ladder into a swarm of angry bees. It doesn't require you to wait for a specific fruiting season in a prehistoric canopy. It just requires a tiny flick of the wrist. But that tiny, effortless gesture is directly answering a deep, ingrained instinct, millions of years in the making. Only the ease of access is new. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. The next time your biology demands something sweet, will you recognize the ancient survivor inside you simply asking to be fed? Our cravings are profound echoes of a world we no longer live in. I really hope this explainer has given you a completely new perspective on that morning cup of coffee. If you want to keep exploring the fascinating gap between the world we were built for and the world we actually live in, please hit subscribe so you don't miss our future explainers. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you next time.